I just want to say hello, welcome everybody. We're excited to have this second session of Talkaoke, virtual Talkaoke at Rich Mix. The last one was a great session, so many ideas coming through, which we're going to run through very, very quickly. And I think Judith's going to say a little bit about the Rich Mix side of things and some of those ideas flowing through. So that'll be the starting point. We don't really know where we're going to go with this session. It's kind of up to you. Maybe now that a few people are in the door, maybe it's time just to go through some of the ways and means we like to do things, because there's so many people in the meeting. What we prefer, I mean, I'm going to be looking out at everybody. I can see some of the people here. Not everyone's got their camera on. But especially if you don't have your camera on, we need you to raise your virtual hand. Not your real hand, your virtual hand. Does someone want to just, in fact, why don't you all practice that? Raise your virtual hands. And that is, if you go into your if you hit the Zoom window, then the bottom row will come up and you'll see a thing called participants. Hit that and you should be able to rate. We've got a lot of virtual hands. It's almost like, raise your hands. Everybody raise your hands. There's a flurry of hands. It's amazing. As hosts, we actually can't raise our hands, so it's not that we don't know what, we don't know what we're doing, but also we can't raise our own virtual hands. So thank you, everybody.
But I feel like this raised hand thing, now and then there'll be somebody who won't be a host, but they'll say, oh, I can't actually raise a hand, but instead I can press something else. So you can press something else as well. Feel free, of course. One of the other things, by the way, hello, I'm Margot, for everybody whom I haven't met yet. So I'll be kind of helping Mikey along during the session. But one of the other things which we discovered with the new Zoom security update is that we can't unmute you. We can mute you, but we can't unmute you. So please feel free to practice. I know, as patronizing as it probably sounds, now 2 months into lockdown, but do just check that you can mute and unmute yourself. And of course, we will remind you. And it will be very clear when you're speaking and no sound is coming out, because people will be in commotion on their screens. But yeah, remember, we can't unmute you. We can mute you, but that's about it. So yeah, so this is the beginning. Also with us, we've got Will and Ellum. You all know they're one of us because they've got funky backgrounds, but some of you also have funky backgrounds. It's very, very 21st century, very into the Zoom era. Oh, Will, you got spotlighted.
Yeah. Why not?
Beautiful. And you're muted, so we can't really talk back.
I really appreciate that. I should have took my opportunity.
Yeah. Anyway, I think it's time to get on with the show. The show must go on. Even in these troubled times, we've got to just keep going. I'm just going to quickly just introduce Ellum as well. That's going to be on the Instagram, exactly. So there's Ellum. Say hi, Ellum. And yeah, let's just get on with this, just because time is of the essence.
And I would just say we're going live on Facebook, so just bear that in mind. If you would rather not be out, not want to share your face on social medias, just turn your camera off. I could have said it in fewer words, couldn't I? Really, it just didn't work out for me this time. But yeah, ready to start.
Okay, so I think the first thing we're going to do is just recap from the last session. As I was saying, we had a really, really interesting passage of conversation. A lot of interesting ideas came up. I'm going to hand it over to Judith, that's going to just give kind of Rich Mix's response to the previous session and some of the visuals that our guy Rick visualized very, very quickly during the last session. So Judith, are you ready? Do you want to quickly say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Judith Kilvington, Chief Exec here at Rich Mix. Lovely to see you all. Some familiar faces and some new faces. I think today's session, like last time, is very much about us gaining as many insights, experiences, backgrounds and expertise from around this table so that it can inform our discussion as we go forward about culture and the community and what we can particularly do from Rich Mix in the coming months. I just wanted to say thank you again to People Speak for bringing this second edition of the Talkaoke. As you all know, Rich Mix is closed at the moment, but it's important for us to be connecting with our communities and platforming ambitious and bold ideas and championing creativity as we go forward. We've had a really quiet period, and we're now, as I think most people are, beginning to look at what we can do with our space going forwards. You know, we would have loved to have had this discussion in the building, but for the moment that's not possible. So these online discussions are really important. I don't know about other people, I'm quite digitaled out at the moment, but I know that we're in safe hands here with People Speak, and it does allow us to have these conversations. It does allow us greater accessibility for some. So looking to the future, we're really grappling with what Rich Mix can be as a community arts centre in East London, particularly, as we know, because the communities of East London are some of the communities who are most affected by coronavirus, and what it is revealing and exacerbating in terms of inequalities. So last month we started this discussion on how can the arts and the cultural sector respond to the needs of the communities, and it's about continuing that discussion. And first of all, just as Mikey was just saying, we're going to recap on some of the themes that came out of last session. One of the key themes, as you can all imagine, was about staying connected, a feeling that culture is important for connecting people during these times of heightened isolation. But how do we reach this? And how do we reach these communities with people who have less access to digital, who have less access to laptops? And how do we ensure that we aren't just relying on online discussions that then do discriminate against some communities? We're looking at how we can deliver things differently, practical, audience and community focused ideas. We've seen how the arts sector has taken to digital online spaces, but what can we do in terms of looking to the outside, looking to public art? Can we see more venues in the future taking to the streets or parks and doing getting through those social distancing measures in an outdoor space? Is this something that our audiences and communities would welcome? Art packs, there's been a lot of discussion. There was a lot of discussion in our last session, and Arts Council England are obviously also looking into this, but is that something that we can take forward, and can we look at the multiple languages that are relevant to our East End communities? Something that I'm particularly keen on is the idea of, is there an opportunity for drive-in cinemas? Can that make a comeback? We're seeing it, I think, across Europe and across America. But what about galleries or theatres and live performance spaces? There's a lot of talk at the moment about the Rich Mix service yard at the back as, you know, sort of an outdoor performance space. Whether that will ever come true, I don't know, but we'll have to get rid of the bins first. Then another key element of the discussion was the funding landscape and starting conversations about how we can approach fundraising as a larger community. What are the collaborations that we haven't thought about before, and what is going to be possible in this post-pandemic landscape where funding is going to be such a difficult issue for us all to resolve? Are there ways and opportunities that we can make bigger, bolder collaborations with new partners? And also, just in light of the recent events and the letter by arts leaders, artistic directors across the community from people of colour, how can we build in diversity into that very important discussion about what the future of arts community and the cultural sector is in a post-pandemic society? So I think that was pretty much all the discussion areas, and I'm going to hand back to Mikey and Margot now to take the discussion forwards.
Okay, so thanks, Judith. Thanks for that, and thanks for really nicely summing up the previous discussion. A lot of the things that come out of it, a lot of things that relate to what we were talking about last time. and I think most of you actually have been on Talkaoke already, so you kind of know the format, and it's the whole point of Talkaoke is it's kind of up to you where you want to take this discussion. There were so many themes last time, and I think we felt that we really wanted to sort of investigate some of those more, but it's kind of up to you which one you want to take first. Do you want to talk about how we reach out to the community more? Do you want to talk about the arts funding? Do you want to talk about the new reality, what everyone's calling the new normal? It's kind of up to you. Does anyone want to kick us off? Anyone want to start the ball rolling?
And just for people who only just joined or recently joined, welcome, hello. We are going live to Facebook on Rich Mix channel, so just bear that in mind. I will probably occasionally mute you. Don't take you personally, but you are the only person who can unmute yourself, so we can't do it anymore. But yeah, certainly lots of subjects to be talking about, and we can take this conversation anywhere you wish.
We've got Andy that's got a hand up to kick us off. I put it down again, but it's too late. It's too late now. You're kicking us off. Thanks for being the first in. So what's your point, Andy?
I was just, I mean, yeah, not to like go right back to the beginning, but what Judith mentioned about sort of feeling digitaled out or sort of virtual out, like this sort of fatigue that people are maybe getting from only all their main channels of communication being through sort of screens and stuff. Just wondered how other people are feeling about that, and whether kind of like however many months we've been doing it now, sort of the novelty's worn off, or I suppose some of the conversations that we've had within the, so I'm an artist that works with kind of people and interested in this sort of time opportunity for engagement. But yeah, there's a load of people that really feel it's just really poor quality communication, and I've sort of asked, well, how can we kind of like improve, or what is it specifically that needs to kind of improve about this sort of digital form to make it more accessible for people? So yeah, just interested in that idea of kind of digital fatigue, maybe.
Just while you're on, Andy, can I just ask you, what is missing from it? What do you not get from the digital that you get from the real?
Well, personally, for me, yeah, I'm sort of enjoying it. Like, I think actually I've been able to have some really interesting conversations with strangers, and they've been fairly spontaneous. But it has been through either this Talkaoke setup or a similar thing that's happening in the north through Pendle, that obviously you lot are involved in as well. But that side of it's been quite good for me. But I do understand that people find it, draining to, I don't know, whether it comes down to literally just having like a fixed kind of perspective that you can't move around. So there's bits of me that think, oh, well, maybe if it was done with 360 video or kind of like VR, would that make a difference where you could sort of take a break from it? Or just the... also the kind of like monologue element of kind of like sort of talking online.
In which case, I think we'll just end it there. So what is missing from the digital environment? Is it a technical challenge? Could we just have better, like 360, so we're all literally in the same room? It's certainly something we want to do at the People Speak, and, have you all within touching distance. But, I mean, is that what's missing? Are we digitaled out? Are we now fed up with the Zoom parties and the Zoom meetings and the Zoom readings and the Zoom this and Zoom that? There are other platforms out there as well. So what do people think? Are we digitaled out, or is it just a question of actually improving the technology and actually making it better? Oh. Emma?
Yes.
Go on.
Oh, I think Emma, you
probably need to turn your microphone on, because you're unmuted, but you're still very, very quiet to be inaudible.
And in the meantime, I'll just say, if you want to raise your hand, we sometimes may miss your physical, fleshy hand. So use the digital hand, the virtual hand button, which you will find in the participants icon at the bottom of your screen, and then you can raise your hand. But we'll do our best to keep an eye on both.
Okay, well, yeah, we're keeping an eye. Emma, try it. Do you want to try again? Hello? No, we still can't hear you. We'll come back to you in a second. Let me come to Martin.
We've got a chat going as well, so if you have any questions or points, please bounce them to chat and I can bring them out.
Okay, Martin, let me come to you. Yes, Martin.
You need to unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself. You see, just when it just got a bit boring in the digital age, Zoom completely changed their whole system.
Game changer.
Yeah.
You can always rely on that.
Okay, Martin, you're good to go.
Hello.
Yay!
Hello, everyone. My observation is that conversation is much more than just hearing people's voices. So I think there's a lot of visual clues that we don't see on digital hookups. So where our eyes are going, what our hands are doing, whether we're crossing or uncrossing our legs, or what our shoulders are doing, and particularly when you're speaking to more than one person at a time, it seems to me that a lot of personal in the same actual space, real-time space, if you're not in that same space, you miss a lot of the kind of personalized clues that we all pick up on subconsciously when we're having an actual conversation. So I think that's part of the reason it becomes a little trying and a bit unrewarding potentially.
Is there a way, do you think, to technologically make it better, or is it just a time that we just gave up on it and just, you know, look forward to the doors unlocking?
My suspicion is that as technology advances, we'll all be sort of wearing goggles and appearing to be in very much the same kind of space. And it will be almost as though we can reach out and touch the people we're talking to. But I think we're a little way off that yet. And I think it slightly depends on what sort of conversation you want to have. I think it's particularly difficult with multiple conversations on the same screen at
when
the same
there's a lot
time.
of flow happening all together.
Yeah, I think sort of knowing when it's your turn to speak, for example, is tricky.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tell me about it. Okay, let me come to Emma, because we got a thumbs up from Emma. I don't know if it's because Martin was kind of saying what you wanted to say, or whether you've sorted out your audio. So let's Emma.
The moment of truth.
No, we're still not hearing you, but keep going with this. Keep going with it.
It will happen.
Maybe start up a side chat with somebody else, and then see if your audio is working there. In the meantime, let me just put this out to others. If suddenly there's a whole load of nonsense coming to the chat, that's because I just dropped the keyboards. We're talking about digital fatigue. Are we actually fatigued with digital? Could it just get better? Is it something we're going to get used to? Are we missing some key fundamental things here in the digital realm? And what about who we're talking to as well? Are we talking to the same people that we were talking to before? These are all some of the questions. Are we, you know, is Zoom doomed? I guess is the question, really, isn't it?
I was waiting for a pun, and I think this is like the closest that we're going to get at this time.
It's just a rhyme at the moment, but you know, I'm warming up. Anyway, so where are we going to go from this? What do people think? Do other people feel digital fatigued, or are we not speaking to those people because they're not joining up? With Selma, you've got a point.
Yeah, for me, I think it's making me miss live experiences even more. I was digital fatigued, if you can say that, before lockdown hit. So now it's just so overwhelming, and I think that if there's a way that we can bring the in real life, even at a social distance or outside, or however we need to for government guidelines, then I think we should be all trying to think of ways to do that.
So you think going outside and separating out would be a much better alternative than the online meetings or the online performances? Is it possible? What do other people think? We've got thumbs up from Martin. Should we now be looking more towards outdoor events, but somehow squared off so that social distancing is minimized? Is that actually safe enough? Do people feel? I mean, we've not got any, as far as I know, any virologists or epidemiologists on this session. But what do people? Kane, you've got a point.
Also, Kirsten gave it a round of applause.
Okay, Kane.
Oh, nice.
Hello.
I guess I'm super fatigued by
Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, they have like this weird, there's this sort of strange tinny sound. It's like voices, but with a kind of metallic edge to it that really grates after a while. But I guess, you know, I'm all for how venues and organizations are able to deliver programs potentially outdoors, potentially in socially distanced ways that you know are in person and real. But I guess one of the good things, speaking to an organization like Streetwise Opera, for example, is what they've been able to do is they have hubs of activity taking place across the UK, and for the first time those hubs feel like they're connected. And I guess how the fact that the digital technology has broken down geographical borders, is there a way that translates into the real world?
Okay. Does it translate into the real world? What do other people think?
I mean, I'm just going to jump in. One of the things that kind of naturally occurred at the last session, I think we've got a little bit of that today as well, is that the digital world, or this digital context, has meant that a lot of people are joining these conversations who are outside of the immediate bubble of interest or geographical location. We had people from 4 continents last time. And I wonder whether people maybe based in London, in Tower Hamlets, or maybe people from outside of that world, whether you've got any kind of views about connectivity. And also, is it shifting perspective from London? Which is a long time coming, but maybe is it good as a bad. But yeah, Andy, you've got a hand up. But feel free, anyone, to contribute, and also comment on chat if you just want to throw in a point.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, we are losing a lot, and people have been complaining. They've been fatigued. They've been missing the real people. Maybe, you know, in the summer we can go outdoors, but are we actually gaining something with the fact that we've got someone like Andy from the north? We're not sure exactly where at this point.
Oh my God.
And it means we can bring in people from all around. So we are gaining something. And could we, if we go to that more physical, real space, will we lose that? Or is there a way to keep that virtual side in the kind of equation? Andy, what did you have a point?
Yeah, just thinking about that sort of weird, like, obviously there's been this restriction of personal space in the sense that you have to stay in your house, and if you're lucky enough to have a garden, that's a bit opened up. But in general, people are much more aware of the smaller amount of physical space that they've got. And then we've also, at the same time, got this massive expansion in who we're connecting with and talking to, and people that have, you know, got family abroad that they haven't spoken to.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's also quite tiring in just moving between those two, like, really extreme spaces of like this much smaller real space. And I've thought, that's quite a lot for, you know, me to get my head around as well. But I think it's been brilliant to be able to kind of like transport myself, I suppose, to like, something like this where there's like a really specific kind of local thing going off that people know really well, and sort of like eavesdrop on that as if you're there as well. So quite a nice little mix for me, I think.
That's the thing. It's like super local, that we're based in Tower Hamlets, but it's also really expansive because we can just go out to the whole world at the same time. And that is it's a kind of weirdness, and it's kind of nice. Will it inform the way we see things once we come out of this? Will it actually change our sort of global, local perspective? Kirsten, you've got a point.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
It's pros and cons, isn't it? I mean, I think the whole Zoom and the digital meeting has been amazing, and it's been amazing for us as an organisation. And it's been amazing because I've also met a load of people that I would not necessarily have met, like you guys, for example, that, you know, from the kind of, I won't say the comfort of my front room, but from my front room, I have actually been able to connect with people that in an ordinary working environment, I would never probably have had the time even to get across London, let alone anywhere else. So I think that's been remarkable. But my main point is that I'm very, very worried about the digital divide. And I work for Academy South Asian Dance, and we do a lot of work in the communities with older people, with people living with dementia and their carers, with special educational needs kids, and with community centres. And one of our partners is Camden Carers, and they've been working on an initiative to try and get devices and tablets tablets into the hands of older people who are very, very isolated and are very, very vulnerable for a variety of reasons. And they've been talking them through on the telephone how to set up their devices and how to access the digital. And they say on average, to get someone who is not used to this technology at all, who kind of is used to a landline, to get them on Zoom takes about 7 hours.
Right.
And that's if these people actually want to do it anyway, if they have the inclination to do it. So I think as much as it's been amazing for the demographic of us who are savvy enough and digital enough, and certainly people much younger than me who are digital natives, I really, really worry that we are more marginalizing an already marginalized and vulnerable group of people. And that's my issue with it. So I think it's been useful, but we need to get back into some kind of live interaction because there are so many people who are missing out.
Can I just ask, Kirsten, once they've got over that huge hump, the 7 hour kind of, and they've got the equipment, do they feel like, oh wow, this is a whole new world? Do they feel like or is it still a little bit kind of baffling and they don't see the point?
To be perfectly honest with you, I don't know the actual answer to that. This is Camden Carers who are doing this, and I think it's so new. This was only a couple of weeks ago, so we don't actually know the answer. But my theory, and I'm basing my own parents on this, who are in their 70s and 80s, is that 7 hours the first day probably needs another couple of hours the next day and another couple of hours the next week. So even if the inclination is there, it's about the capacity of people to actually keep that momentum going for people. I would imagine it is kind of, oh, this is fantastic, this is amazing, I can talk to all of these people. I mean, we've been trying to get some of our dance workshops out into the community, and I don't mean up on Facebook or Vimeo. I mean, literally into the people that we were working with in February, and they are bespoke. They're kind of, hello Mary, how are you doing, that kind of video. And it's just, we're losing momentum. We're really losing momentum on all of the work that we've already been doing in the community, and that really, really worries me.
I mean, I guess my question is there a kind of light at the end of the tunnel? Is it worth it in the end? Obviously, it's a lot more work, and everything seems to be a lot more work. I mean, I tend to do a kind of like, whereas my mum's quite happy with Zoom, she only goes through Facebook to check our family through me. So I've kind of she's got to go on my Facebook, which can be also a little bit troubling. Anyway, we're talking about this digital divide, and let's not just go down an alleyway of talking about my family. You've all probably, got experiences with older people, trying to get them on, or not necessarily older people, but those that are on the other side of the digital divide, trying to take them across the divide. Is it worthwhile? But also, what are the barriers there? Is it worth making that long journey through the kind of Zoom frustration to the other side, or whatever other platforms are available? What do people think?
Also, in terms of other platforms, we've got a hand up from Poppy. Hello, Poppy. But also, at some point, we can bring in some conversation from the chat and the Facebook.
Is anything happening on the chat and the Facebook? What's
Yeah, Will, do you want to say Facebook?
Yeah, we've got Simon that's messaged in just on the conversation, saying that we're still missing the real, but the sort of digital fatigue can be a problem for some of the people have mentioned, but also saying that it's opened up lots of opportunities, actually, maybe to meet people across the globe that you didn't have an opportunity to, or even maybe starting to break down some of those barriers from the country versus the city as well. So although there are some problems coming from it, there's actually a lot of positives as well that are coming out.
Yeah, interesting.
And also we've got on the chat, we've got a point from Wabwire Joseph, all the way from Uganda. So Joseph, at any point do jump in and say what you said on the chat and kind of grow it. But it is about Joseph is saying about positive aspect of connectivity online, and particularly working with young people who are disabled. And yeah, but there's a lot of fatigue and the kind of combination of digital and live. I mean, and Lara, and sorry, and just a point from Lara about kind of maybe taking some of these kind of digital conversations into real open air, into outdoors, maybe doing some stuff with masks on. So if you want to comment on that, Lara, it'd be great to hear your voice.
I mean, that's quite an interesting idea. Like the mask itself could be some kind of form of, so, you know, creative act or part of the you know, maybe mass theatre will have a, I'm not going to say revival because there's probably people out there that are saying, what? Mass theatre, you know, but anyway, masks themselves could be you know, a part of this. Being outdoors could be a part of this.
I would like to come back. Sorry, go on.
Well, no, I just wanted to bring in Poppy because Poppy had a raised hand. I don't want to exclude those people that are not on video. So let me just bring Poppy in if you're still there.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Yes.
I think maybe my comments are kind of echoing, which is what's going on with the chat, which is that, yeah, definitely I'm feeling a lot of fatigue. And I know I work for Spotlight, which is a youth organisation. And I know since the weather has been nice and there's like unlimited amount of time that can be spent outdoors now, I know a lot of our young people are much more into kind of going out and having socially distanced meet up with their mates rather than chatting with me on Zoom. So yeah, I suppose my point is the reason why this fatigue exists is because there isn't actually another option. And I suppose it feels like it would be a waste for us to not sort of use what we've learned over these months about the potential of like digital interaction. And I thought, was it Kirsten's point about with older people? I mean, we have so many, and it's not just older people, we have young people who you know, for whatever reason, accessibility issues, you know, can't come into physical spaces. So I think the digital has so much potential with some of those groups in kind of connecting them in with what's going on with the community. But yeah, I suppose for me it feels like there are massive potentials for the digital kind of interactions, but definitely it needs to be mixed with you know, some type of socially distanced kind of IRL stuff. That's, I suppose, where I'm at with it.
IRL meaning?
Oh, in real life.
Okay. Okay, so this kind of hybrid approach seems to be the way things are going, and that like a bit of digital and reaching out. And a lot of people have said to us, it's great, you know, that things become a bit more accessible. I just want to also point out, Martin, before you take it off, I just want to spotlight your your imaginative mask. Oh, you've got two of them. So there is also potential here for using a, you know, using a bit of creativity on the mask situation. So we've got a couple of hands up here. So I guess just to sum up, we're talking about this hybrid approach, you know, understanding the difficulties of all these things, but somehow finding a way through. Lara, let me come to you, and then I'll come to you, Kane, just because Lara's not been on yet. So come on, Lara, what have you got to say?
Yeah, just very quickly as a comment to what I put in the chat. The major problems come obviously not with artists, but with non-professionals when you try to involve communities, because I think that the idea of this, we want you also to talk about communities, and for us, especially when we run workshops for non-English speakers like migrants and refugees, for instance, which we do usually on a Monday evening in Tottenham, we went online, and it's been exciting, it's been really great, but immediately we lost the people, as I said, you know, people with children, for instance, who live in very kind of small flats, and they have children, you know, running around, and they don't feel they can do it. Also, people who struggle with English, because I think the platform and the video creates a barrier that makes them feel like, oh, you know, I don't understand very clearly. We know that technology can fail you, so maybe the sound is not clear enough. So that's why I was saying, you know, we might try to do like the place where we usually run workshops as a courtyard, because we wanted to run it in an enclosed space somehow, not like going to the park, because then it's like people feel a bit conspicuous. And so like if we are allowed to try and do, and maybe a mix, you know, you can still be on, I was thinking, you know, can you still be on video for people who want to join on video, and then at the same time have a few people in the room and experiment with that.
So a bit of a mix could be the way ahead. There's courtyard ideas. In a way, what I'm getting from this is it's just about really being a bit more imaginative Let me come to Kane, and probably there's some chat on Facebook, Will, from you, but let me come to you first, Kane. And then we'll find out what people on Facebook are saying.
Oh yeah, it's not a particularly inspired thought, but it's just quite funny how there's this whole focus on like everything's going to move outdoors. We're going to have like drive-through cinemas, like outdoor events.
Yeah.
All restaurants are going to go outdoors. But you know, English weather, I don't think anyone's really factored that in.
Yeah.
I mean, we might have reached the end of summer already.
Yeah. I mean, is it about kind of, you know, do we just need to, where we've been so innovative with kind of digital, do we need to get innovative with event shelters and umbrellas as well?
Yeah.
To take this into account.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is if we had like these portable waterproof stages that artists carried around with them, you know, there's or to go back to my point about the role of Zorbs in this. Zorbs?
Yeah.
We
have had the Zorb comment already. That's been noted and duly noted. Let me go to, I'm not just kind of cutting you off there, but I kind of am. So
do cut me off.
I'm kind of going to Will now. Is there some comment from Facebook? Is it?
Yeah, we had Rajesh, who's a CEO of a charity that works with isolated older people in Tower Hamlets messaging. Yeah. And he was saying, with regards to this sort of digital conversation, one of the problems he's seeing is that there's a whole demographic that's being missed out as well at the moment with the elderly. You know, there's certain charities that have reached out trying to fundraise for things like iPads, but they don't even have access to things like broadband and Wi-Fi. So it's when we transition, I suppose, the next question, into this sort of hybrid, in real life digital conversation, how do we involve that community as well?
Okay. Any thoughts on any ideas about how to do it from the chat, or is it just more of a question?
Not quite yet. A lot of questions being posed at the moment, but hopefully if people are watching, throw out some answers as well.
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be the whole answer, because one of the great things about Talkaoke is that various people can complete some of the answers together. So, you know, it is a big question out there. Everyone's noticed it, this digital divide. How do we bring people across and make these connections with people? Andy, let me come to me. Maybe you've got a little bit of the answer.
Yeah, so just to share some things that I guess we're doing in Bradford and around there. So there's a community arts space called South Square Centre in Thornton, which is a little rural village on the edge of Bradford. And yeah, obviously they've been really thinking about how to engage with people that don't necessarily have digital access, as particularly older people. So tomorrow, because I play a bit of music as well, we're going to go and do a gig in their garden. Right. They're inside to an old people's sheltered housing place. So the people will be indoors. I'll be outdoors. Hopefully, it won't be raining in Bradford. It's always sunny here. And sort of pumping the music into the shared space of the residential home for the residents. But I mean, also sort of live streaming that at the same time to reach, because they've had loads of success with this kind of like online program of mindfulness activities in May. So kind of, you know, from foraging trails to kind of Tai Chi lessons and yoga. There's been great sort of response to that. But yeah, that's one of the things we're doing up here.
So you're just kind of messing around in the garden, but there is also like a hybrid element to that because it's being streamed. But it's a kind of good place because you've got like a lot of people watching that maybe are not digital, that digital people.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, and it's weird to think that, well, you know, as a performer, you're playing to a specific audience that are there, which will be sort of older people in a residential home, but it's likely that the audience that would then, you know, come in online will be a completely different group. So yeah, it's quite a sort of,
and that might also be just a way of just improving, you know, getting a bit more intergenerational communication going on. Anyway, let me come to Kirsten. What's your point, Kirsten?
Yes, similar to what Andy was saying, really. But I think what I'm planning to do, as some restrictions ease, is try and work with some of our partners who have direct access to people in the communities, because we don't, and also try and work with the local authorities, because what I'm a bit worried about is kind of the geography of it, the location of it. You know, if we, for example, we're talking about doing dance in basketball courts in a quad within a housing estate, which is potentially a nice idea, but you know, what are the permissions? And you know, I've done a lot of risk assessments, but I've never done a risk assessment for a pandemic. And frankly, I would like a bit of help with that. And I wonder if the local authorities or the housing departments or the cultural departments, or those people who probably know more than I do about outdoor work and the risk involved, not from the artist perspective, because we would look after the artists, but from the audience perspective. Because I think, you know, people are pretty sensible and they're very aware of social distancing, but what if there is an issue? What if they're not? What if we are worried that people are a bit too bunched together, and actually we've created that? And I'm not saying we won't do it, but I would like some support as an artistic organization to make sure everybody's safe.
I mean, I guess when you talk in culture, when you're talking about risk in a cultural sense, you're talking about the risk of it going wrong or not being a very good show or the audience not getting it. But in this case, the risk is much greater because you're actually risking the health of the audience. So you've got to bring that in, and suddenly we're having to collaborate really with a lot greater, wider expertise. But, you know, let's just take that example of a dance performance in a basketball court in the middle of an estate, because I think it's quite a good one. And, you know, what is it possible? What are the ways of doing it? Can you connect to a wider audience online? How do you make sure that people are safe, the live audience are safe, and the performers? So there's so many questions there, and I think it's quite a good one. Margot, you've got a point.
I've got a point. It's just something that Lara mentioned, and we kind of like skirted over it. But I think one of the things that this pandemic is really bringing to light is that people's living conditions are terrible. Sometimes it's just impossible to treat our audiences or audiences of my show, for instance, as, you know, as business as normal, because the reality of people is like no one cares about Zoom or whether the content is entertaining or not if they're having 3 children screaming and, you know, and they're living in a block of flats, and, you know, and it's really, you know, and it's just uncomfortable to live in. And I wonder whether it's time for the arts and cultural sector to stop skirting around the surfaces, and just like the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that happened with dismantling of the statue in Bristol, is it now time to actually put the cosmetics aside and actually use our platform and our creativity to tackle those issues instead of trying to fix some superficial stuff? That would be my contribution.
So what are you saying, Margot? Are you saying that that actually if we are going, you know, if we're going into an area of social housing where people may not have the housing that they need to have, there's much bigger issues. Has dance got a platform there, or are you saying that we need to amplify those problems with the cultural intervention? Or, I mean, that goes out to everybody actually. Like, okay, there's much bigger problems out there. Some of the ones that Margot just mentioned. How do we, on the culture side, actually intervene there? And is it about amplifying what other people have got to say? Is it about making a statement ourselves? Some big questions there. Anyone got a response to that? I'm not necessarily an answer, because I think what you're talking about is really reshaping the whole of society. But can we contribute to that? Any thoughts from anybody?
I mean, I don't know, just this
nice
morning.
One, Margot, you killed it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go. No, because this morning I was just reading on Twitter that, you know, Sadiq Khan, who is the mayor of the city that a lot of people are, you know, on this chat are living in, it's the capital of this country. He's saying he's going to review all the statues to check whether, you know, whether we're okay with all these statues being up and around. And I think that right now people and, you know, and with the Black Lives Matter movement, I think people are really very much in a listening mode, but everybody's also waiting for what actions are going to come next. And I think you know, and I think the responsibility on art centers has always been, you know, or cultural organizations has always been big. You know, we always had responsibility, But now I think it's bigger than ever, and I wonder whether, you know, what people, what might we do?
Okay, so
I don't know, as a sector.
We're just getting our head around social distancing and the digital divide, and now you're talking about starting a revolution.
Yeah.
But you know, this is the challenge that is set to artists, art practitioners, people that host venues. I mean, should we be getting more political? Should we be speaking out some of these issues a bit more wide? Martin, you've got a point over there. Just unmute yourself. Yep, go on.
Hello. I think, you know, to state the obvious, it's usually a matter of a mix of education and financial. And I think that it's been fairly extraordinary to me that the Tory government has become the closest to introducing a universal wage, for example. And it does seem to me potentially interesting that political parties might want to think about both supplying and training digital equipment to, shall we say, senior citizen groups, and paying for access to something that we almost can't operate in the modern world without. So it would seem to me that a government initiative to introduce training groups, which are normally charitably run at the moment, would be a very helpful thing. So not only would it provide an arena where people can communicate with one another, but they also enhance one another's learning, is my experience. So if you've got 12 people over 55, shall we say, in a room, but they're not familiar with computer and digital language, then they can mutually learn from one another in quite a profound and life-changing way. And it strikes me that if the government has suddenly managed to jump out of austerity with such a big bang, then perhaps there's room for greater forms of social inclusion that have been financially limited up till now. But now that we've suddenly decided we can afford to spend money like water on everything, that would be one of the arenas that the government could usefully spend money on. Or, you know, arts councils, I mean, arts organizations don't necessarily have that sort of funding.
Well, I mean, at the moment, I think we're talking about the funding really being sucked away, but are the I mean, is the British
need is what I'm trying to say. I think that
is this British inclement weather actually shaking the magic money tree, and suddenly we've got a windfall, and is that going to lead to much better social inclusion, and we're going to be fixing some of the problems that Margot talked about and that other people have talked about? Well, there was something from...
Fingers crossed, I'd say.
Fingers crossed. We'll see. I mean, and does that also mean that, I suppose, if the funds are more kind of socially diverted to a social kind of platform, does that mean that cultural organizations should be actually looking to, you know, be part of that social offering, let's say, in its widest sense? Will, there was a hand up from you?
Yeah, it was just actually in response to what Martin was saying. Some of the people on Facebook, Simon had written in saying that he was trying to get funding actually to start things like an online discussion with the elderly classes. And the way that they're trying to engage that community is by dropping off flyers as they're doing food deliveries. So there are certain projects that are going on, I think, but it's how we move that into a post-COVID society as well, and how we utilise both of the things, both digital and online, in real life even.
Okay, so, you know, there are ways to reach out to that audience and drop the mic and connect them. Where do we want to go with this discussion? Do we want to talk about fomenting the revolution, being part of this kind of wave of activity that's been happening recently? And how does that relate to COVID? Do we want to talk about this idea of this basic income, money for socially including people? There's so many things here. Andy, you had your hand up for a second.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think, there's loads there from sort of Margot and Martin's points and what's coming through on the chat. I mean, the thing that has been exciting to me as someone who's kind of really interested in universal basic income as a a policy that would address inequality and like as a way of kind of providing social justice, is that that's been sort of brought into the mainstream as a conversation, which is kind of great. I think one of the positives from the pandemic. Also with the kind of like Black Lives Matter and this kind of very kind of interesting mix of like super engaged online kind of campaigning mixed with kind of like actual physical protests and things that are happening outdoors. I mean, I think that's kind of started to sort of break down that idea that it's just loads of people on the internet doing stuff and it doesn't have any actual repercussions. And one of the things that I kind of was excited about from the Black Lives Matter campaign is this kind of like defund the police sort of campaigning, which is a sort of, I mean, to me, I didn't know whether just to put it out there and sort of have a conversation about it, seems like a sort of way of kind of saying, actually, if enough people get together and make sort of quite practical suggestions about how wealth could be distributed differently. So it's not just a magic money tree conversation, but saying, well, you put money here, and actually enough people have said online that we want it in this place, that does have real world effects. That's like structural change that can happen through sort of digital means. But anyway,
I mean, it's funny you should say that, because just to tie this on one of our other strands of conversation with Bethlehem Gallery, we were talking about a pro-social police force, the kind of which were originally called the art police, which are actually not about telling people not to do stuff, but actually about trying to help people that were having problems out there in a kind of creative, constructive way. So, I mean, that's already a kind of suggestion about how to sort of divert maybe money from the policing budget into something that's still out there on the streets, but I mean, I don't think it was seen as instead of the police, but kind of as an addition to a very kind of, what's the word? Maybe Margot, you help me out on this. You were there, so do you want to say a little bit about this?
About the art police.
Yeah.
I think art police was just a kind of I'm going to say force, but I mean it in a positive way. Something that kind of points people towards positive kind of outlets for the creativity and pointing them towards some kind of engaging with each other in a more kind of meaningful way. But I do wonder, also just kind of bringing it back to a conversation we were having, I think there may be some artists on this call as well, because I think I'd be very interested to see how is it for the artist here, and are we just kind of heading for survival mode? Okay, drop everything, drop all the fluffy stuff, let's just revolutionize now. Or is it even time to be talking about representation in the arts? For instance, that's one of the conversations that I'm hearing on social media and within the kind of sector. So I'd be interested to see if any people have any views on that. But also, Poppy, you were mentioning about consulting young people as well on what the new normal may look like, and I wonder whether that's something that you can kind of bring in, whether anything has been kind of coming up in the conversations that you guys are having individually with the people that you connect with, not necessarily through work, but people, in your street or whatever. I know social distancing, we also observe that, but we sometimes have conversations with people outside of our studio. So, in fact, we did a young people's session yesterday. One of the tasks we set them is to go and get opinions from other people who aren't them. And I wondered whether you've been having interesting conversations with the people who are not here, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm going to sum that up as who's not in the room, and what are they saying? What are the people not in the room? We talked a lot about this this digital divide, but who's not in the room? Not necessarily just because of digital reasons, but because they don't know about these things. They're not in this flow. So. What are they saying? I'm going to go to Alexandru because you've not said anything yet, and I'll come to you afterwards, Kane. What's your point?
Oh, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Of all? Yeah, hi there. Sorry, this is my first
welcome
here in Rich Mix. Yeah, I'm a theater director, Romanian born. Been living in the London area for a while, and I just wanted to pick up something about this who's not in the room and to sort of start a conversation, touch on something which is rarely discussed and covered, like the fact that the migrant communities based in this country, and especially when we talk about London, and I mean the first generation migrants are deeply underrepresented in the arts and culture here. And if you think about it, like according to statistics, like almost 40% of London's population is basically foreign born. But how many do you see them, you know, because I come from theater, how many do you see them on stage, in the creative things, on TV, in the arts in general? So I think as a result of this lack of representation, there's also a lot of misrepresentation. So for example, if you're like an Eastern European actor, you will probably only have to, you'll only play cleaners or sex workers, as if every migrant coming from that geographical area can only fulfill those functions. So it's like a whole circle which comes from not involving those communities and people from these communities.
Okay, so in a way, there's a kind of expectation that the mainstream culture, although it's only 60% in London, is projecting what immigrants are actually, you know, the point of immigrants is cleaners and sex workers, and they've not got this kind of wider sense of the possibilities. And does that actually reflect back onto that community and sort of tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing? I mean, and I guess just while you're on, Alexandru, how does that, has that changed when we've come into this COVID times? Is it, is there a different reflection now? Or is it just more of the same?
I think it's more of the same. I mean, I can only speak on, you know, behalf of the, you know, first generation migrants, because I kind of identify myself that way. I think this particular issue is like, it's nowhere, and especially like in theater in London, which is like such a multicultural pot, and there's like so many migrant communities. And I think, and obviously there's like a whole, it's kind of imposed on you as an actor, like, okay, you can only play those two roles. And but if more of us, like coming from those backgrounds, would be in the room, that wouldn't be the case, because we would say, okay, this is not acceptable. You can't just perpetuate those two things. Like,
but I mean, I guess my question is there a wider effect of that? Does that then reflect back onto that community? But anyway, I'm just, because a few hands up now, let me just come to Kane. And I guess the main theme is who's not in the room. How do we represent that? And is it just the same old when it comes to the migrant population? Have things changed? Kane, what's your point?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of organizations, a lot of cultural organizations are working with really underrepresented groups, and are also really actively, you know, prior to COVID-19, really actively looking at how they remove the barriers to those people who aren't amongst their community, you know, those people within their local area. I think the thing for me now, which sort of comes back to that thing of having a place where you can talk and find out what people need, is just understanding that the current programs that many of us run maybe aren't needed at the moment, or need to be really thought of in a different way. I think it's how you can be prepared to, you know, say off the back of conversations like this, how you then actually action that into meaningful things.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good question. How do we now rethink things? Listening to this kind of conversation, being aware of what's going on, is it opportunity to actually rethink things a little bit? I just want to come to Lara, because I could see you vigorously shaking your head when Alexandru was talking. So what's your point, Lara?
My point. No, I completely agree with Alex. And I think there is a problem of representation. It's not just, you know, I appreciate organizations try to reach out to communities. It's not just about trying to reach out to migrants as audiences, but I think as migrants, we are artists here and we are not represented. So it's like, as actors, you know, I'm many things, including an actress, and I don't work, you know, or just very, very kind of rarely work because I have an accent, and and that is something that Equity is actually trying to challenge. But you know, Alex is a director. How many established directors? We actually found a movement about you know migrants in theatre, and we were looking for, okay, let's try and engage with very successful migrants in theatre, and we came up with 4 so far. We haven't even completed one hand, and because we're not there. And I think it's like, you know, you see migrants and foreign people everywhere in society, but not in theatre. And I think it's a question there. It comes like the artistic directors, boards, producers. It's such a tiny minority, and it's. If there's 38% of us, let's talk London, there's 38% of us. Well, UK wide, I think it's 14%. But I think if you look at statistics, we're probably at 1% in theatre. So I think that is also some. And
what do you think that's about?
I think it's about a certain insularity of British theatre. That somehow feels like, especially I think, I mean, maybe Alex can talk more about being a director, but you know, if you bring something that is different and you didn't maybe necessarily train here, or your experience is from somewhere, there is a like suspicion. And I think it's also very based on the fact that you go into audiences, oh, you know, are you going to bring something different that audiences and they're going to understand? You have an accent and audiences might react strangely. I think there is an underestimation of audiences as well, because I think audiences are not stupid.
Okay, well, I mean, I think that's a good question as well. Are we underestimating our audience? And this goes out to those people on the other side of the digital divide, the people that are not in. Are we actually underestimating those people and their ability to grasp new things, to you know, to get with this exceptional program that we've got at the moment, you know, for in you know, very strange times, but are we kind of underestimating the ability of our audience here? So it's, where do we want to go with this conversation? Do we want to talk about who's not in the room? Do we want to talk about the migrant voice, connecting out to those migrant communities? I think someone earlier on said that certain migrant communities have got a higher risk of suffering severe symptoms of the virus. Are we reaching out to those people? So, you know, I mean, where do we want to go with this conversation? Do we want to talk about this kind of mix between politics and art and culture? Have we got that right? Or should we be kind of putting it on the line a bit more? Margot, you've got a point.
I'm just taking from the chat. I mean, Kirsten's saying about, you know, it kind of, it became a conversation about, you know, is there representation currently a subject that we should be talking about, or is this, you know, trumped now by a global pandemic, and it's quite hard to argue with it. So is it fine that we're not talking about it, or, you know, or do we need to think a bit about, you know, what the new normal is going to be like from the kind of venues point of view? And I wonder from, you know, I think there is lack of communication between artists, be it of any background really, and the venues and the programming where all this is going. And I wonder whether anyone who is in a kind of programming position, whether you could give us a bit of an insight into where your mind is at, and whether you're thinking about representation and who you programming. Are you programming, you know?
Okay, so let's it's a bit of a challenge to the people that run venues in the room, and what are you doing what are you doing to actually to include those voices, not just as audience, as Lara says, but actually as participants right now. So that's the question that goes out.
And also, Kirsten, do you want to jump in and share some of your views that you've shared on the chat?
Sure. I mean, I'm not in programming, just to be clear. But I suppose I was just picking up from what you said, Margot, about this talk about representation, and how vital I think it is to keep that conversation going even during the pandemic. In fact, maybe even more so. Because lots of people have raised the point about how vulnerable and underrepresented voices are actually disproportionately hit by the pandemic. And actually that gives it, that's therefore even more impetus to have the conversations about representation, about diversity, about equalities, or lack of. But I do wonder, and I don't know how other people feel, but I think the pandemic has become all-encompassing and has become the headlines for 3 months now, quite rightly. And it's almost seen as a reason not to approach these other difficult, challenging, troubling issues within society. And likewise, climate change. You know, all of these things have kind of fallen off the radar, whereas actually all of these conversations I feel need to be happening together. You know, this is part of our society, and actually everything is bound together in terms of the people in our society and the inequalities and the issues within our society. And as other people have raised, the point that the pandemic has just heightened these inequalities. So actually I think those conversations and those thoughts that have fallen down the pecking order of the news need to be brought to the forefront, because it's all got to be addressed together. You can't silo this stuff.
I mean, in a way, we've kind of, there was already a huge challenge of how do we bring in all of these questions before the pandemic, but that challenge has just increased, but we've actually got to step up to that challenge and actually address that. Let me come to Judith, because the question was put out there to venues. Challenging times, difficult questions.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is what I'm really keen to hear. Rich Mix, you know, Rich Mix is all about representing marginalised voices and the different communities of East London represented across our stages, our very different stages, and also intrinsic to our learning and participation programme. What we're grappling with at the moment is what does that look like in this post-pandemic future? You know, I've been posing the question on chat. We're talking a lot about digital and online streaming, but actually, you know, for me, it's really important that we start reopening Rich Mix. But where does fear and anxiety sit within gathering in indoor spaces, and what can we do? How can we rethink what our live program looks like, what our learning and participation program looks like, to ensure that we can continue to support artists across a range of artistic platforms, but across a range of communities, people of colour, you know, ensure that we are able to keep promoting what we've always done at Rich Mix, which is the communities of East London. But how do we do that within an economic environment where we may have massively reduced audiences? We may have artists who no longer have access to project funding. So what can we, you know, sort of, it would be ridiculous just to recreate what we did pre-pandemic, but what are those ideas? What are those new collaborations that we can put into place? Can we use our performance spaces in different ways? Can we look to smaller gatherings? Can we look to sharings? Can we look, you know, but how economically can we support?
So in a way, there's two questions there. That, you know, there's this thing that everything's become a lot more difficult, but also economically the whole model is, I mean, is badly damaged, if not completely broken. How do we actually deal with that situation?
I think Kane and Selma, you had your hand up as well. And also, if there's anything coming through on social medias, just give us a shout as well. But I think it's a really good question about, you know, what's going to happen in the near future. How what should we be doing as venues, or what should venues be doing, and whether there's a degree of understanding between the, you know, there's a whole sector of freelancers and people who are out of jobs. So are we retraining now, or what are we doing? And yeah, how do we stay true to our aims and foundations of our organizations and move forward? I think these are big questions. And also, Tracy, you threw in some points about families and our families being adequately supported, and I wonder whether you would like to grow that thought. But Kane, do you want to just jump in and say what you have to say? I can't see on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of, I don't think it's necessarily helped by the Arts Council, but you know, there was initially this feeling that, oh, maybe by the autumn things would be back relatively to normal, and venues would be able to reopen and restart their programs as they were pre-COVID. And I think, you know, in the past month at least, people have woken up to the fact that that's not realistic, and we're talking, you know, a lot longer time frames here. But I just feel that venues particularly need to sort of hit it head on, of really remodeling their organization in a way that is reflective. And I think just, you know, coming with a fundraising hat on, really understanding the implications over the next 2 to 3 years of how much they need to raise to have a completely adapted model where there can be no expectation that there'll be much in the way of earned income brought in. I think it's interesting if you look at, like, Sage Gateshead this week, announced a fundraising campaign basically to cover what they've worked out is going to be the cost to them over the next 3 years, how much they actually need to bring in. And starting to do that in the same way that if you were doing a building project, you say it costs X million, that's what we need to raise to make it happen. But being able to put a figure on it, and being able to change the conversation around funding from this kind of we need the money to stay alive to being more precise of saying we need the money so that we can actually do some really brilliant things in ways that we would never have thought of before.
Well, I mean, are the funders really open to this, you know, this complete radical rechange of how culture venues are set up? Are they really open to that? And is it the way that the funders want to go, that you know, in the end, the Arts Council, the institutions, would they be up for this level of, you know, in a way, of refocusing onto engaging the wider community?
Yeah, because the majority of those sort of more established funders are directing their support anyway to communities that are most effective.
Right.
Most, you know, and that's good, you know, and I think it's the social role and the civic role of cultural organisations is going to have to come to the fore,
right,
if organisations want to survive.
So in a way, we're kind of almost being squeezed to this more social role, but it seems to be the way that most people on this session want to go anyway. Andy, what's your point?
I mean, it was just I guess, it was kind of summed up quite nicely at the end there, but just, the civic role of kind of like of art institutions or organisations, or the community role that they're playing is obviously going to sort of be more pronounced, or sort of, I guess, more validated even by sort of funders and people. So it's like actually doing something quite normal at the moment, like teaching people how to make bread is suddenly something that a kind of like an art institution could be doing, because doing it in this current situation makes it quite novel and creative and stuff. So, I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. I think, you know, as an artist, I'm very keen. I also want to say, when you're supporting that kind of challenge out to art institutions about representation and saying, okay, what are the venues doing about it? What are the arts organisations doing about it? I also, you know, try to think as an artist myself, you know, to try and accept that challenge as well and say, okay, well, what can I be doing as an artist to create space and work with other people in different ways? It's kind of the responsibilities across a few different people. But yeah, that idea of just doing something much more functional, kind of like, rather than, or something that has this kind of a more kind of pragmatic kind of approach, is that the way that artists, well, that not just arts funding but culture will be moving in anyway? And if it is that a good thing?
Well, let me just want to go back a couple of sentences, so like you're trying to think up new ideas, because I think one of the things that's been requested, Judith said, let's hear some ideas. So what are the ideas? Have you got any? I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but what are the ideas of how to
idea. So I think, a lot of the stuff that I've been doing is about the future of work. So kind of like, you know, really trying to kind of engage young people in that discussion about the way that work is changing, and using digital technologies to do that. So I'm working on a computer game at the moment, a VR computer game, where you explore the future of work in Pendle, and that's all sort of created through conversations with people that wouldn't not hopefully, but part of that conversation normally in these sort of little areas.
So you're using virtual reality and using technology to kind of get to almost rethink the economic reality, I suppose.
Yeah, to sort of, create new worlds. But I suppose that's the technology there's used as a bit of a kind of, well, initially it was just more as a sort of like a honeypot to get sort of younger people involved in these normally quite boring conversations about the future of work, which
okay, I see. So it's
whereas
like we've got
now it's become kind of like actually, well, the only way to do that at the moment is through those kind of technologies. So it's kind of just this move between like quite sort of practical, pragmatic stuff and kind of what we'd normally consider as creative or imaginary. I think that those two things are kind of getting melded together, or our like understandings of them are changing a bit.
Okay, so we've got, thank you, Andy, for some of those ideas that come out, and I think it'll be good just to get some real ideas, just like the real thing about the idea of hosting a dance performance in a basketball court that we had earlier on. It's good to get these like really concrete ideas about, reconfiguring things, because I think it really gives a real sense of how to do these things. But I just want to also put that out to some of the people that have been listening all along that have not said anything, because we've got a lot of people on the stream that have been listening, and I'm sure you've got ideas, and we'd really like to hear what you've got to say. And what are some of the ideas? How can venues reconfigure themselves to be more in touch with the community? What is how they're actually going to work economically when the money's drying up, and it takes so much more effort, to actually make things happen, because you've got to get people on Zoom, or you've got to really go through a longer process, socially distanced process. Where do we go from here? Kane, have you got a point?
It's got a real idea. Yeah, I mean, I'm involved in running a big conference that happens every March, and what we're talking about is having it that you'd have some sort of live audience, socially distanced for that, but that you would also have a digital audience at the same time. And I'm really interested in how you can have, it's almost taking that sort of empty National Theatre Live model, that you have stuff live streamed with a live audience in the room, and that becomes the model.
I mean, I think that's the way a lot of people on this chat seem to be going. It's like this hybrid model where you've got a bit of live and a bit of digital and a bit of something else in between, a bit of art magic, and go from there. So I mean, what are other people's ideas?
I think, Laura, you've got some interesting views about, maybe looking at how we can use the buildings differently, and you talk about sharing the burden. And I wonder whether, to some extent, of course, this is all money related, but equally, we are heading for a massive shift, I would say, hopefully, as the world, as a society, as a global society. And I wonder whether in the future, it's not going to be so much about money.
Okay, will it not be so much about money in the future?
Judith is just, I can't hear you, but I feel like you're exhaling really heavily.
Yeah. Okay, so where do we go? Do we go Judith? Do we go Lara? Judith, do you want to quickly say something on that?
I would love it not to be about the money, but we had a wonderful business model generating £9 for every pound invested in us by the Arts Council, and it's gone out the window. And so we have to think creatively about how we can reprofile our activities, how we can repurpose our space, how we can give back, sort of what we feel to the community is so important. But we have really practical problems with running costs of a building, a massive building, a number of theatres, we know, sort of the number of theatres that are closing down at the moment and going into hibernation is, it's terrifying. It's a terrifying prospect. But for me, we have 24 organisations that we host within ReachMix. We have a restaurant, sort of we feel that we are an important community hub, and I am, reaching out. I mean, we're talking a lot about co-creation. What can our projects be in terms of the artists, the audiences, the communities, the families that we work with? But we can't pretend that money isn't an issue.
that you have to pay people, you have to pay the rent. Money, you can't just take money out of the equation and everyone's going to do everything for free in the end, because it just can't, or can it work like that? I don't know. Not if you want organizations like Rich Mix. Lara, did you have a point?
Yeah, and I think it's not being naive and thinking that money is not a problem. Obviously, money is a problem because spaces have rents and have bills and all that. But I think what I am increasingly thinking about, as somebody who's been trying for years to engage with venues with very little results, is just say, okay, rather than just wait for somebody else to come and help me, it's how about taking over a building, but not on my, like, one company can't afford taking over a building. It's impossible. So I'm like, how is it possible to go back to cooperatives, for instance? Like, so if I had another 5 companies like me and we could share the rent and we can have a program that's complement, show complement.
So in a way, it's like a cooperative of cooperatives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when we don't need the building, we can rent it for, rehearsal space, or, we can run workshops for students, drama students or actors. So I'm thinking, is like, do we need to become creative and rethinking how, instead of having like a pyramid where there's people at the top, and as a company, you are somebody's guest, you actually, obviously, it takes a lot of the utopian side of it is that it takes a lot of mutual trust, a lot of collaboration, a lot of kind of not wanting your ego. So like, my company is gonna take the best slot. Do you know what I mean? It's that there's a lot of stuff coming into play. But at the same time, if you do find artists and companies that you want to collaborate with, I wonder whether to try and think outside the box, so that you're not naive to think that money doesn't work. But for instance, for us, like marketing, like, think about, do you have a marketing plan? If there was like 6 companies sharing a building, then you can bring each other's audiences to shows. So is that something that is possible to think about? That's what
so in a way, it's a more of a sharing model, more of a non-hierarchical model, where you're sharing audiences, you're sharing resources, you're sharing and building, you're sharing everything, basically.
Yeah, that's my utopian kind of theatre is like that.
Let's go to Margot. You've got a point.
Yeah, I think, from the point of view of a theatre maker, I feel like there's always like a bit of a pressure. I think there's like a bit of a double bluffing going on. Venues think the artists are going to bring the audiences and big bucks, and then the artists think, oh no, I'm just going to go to this big venue because they're going to do the same thing for me. And I think there's lack of transparency. That's how I see it. And everything that you're talking about, Lara, it just kind of comes from, if as a sector we truly kind of buy, because what does representation look like? That looks like supporting your artists who look differently to you, making the work they make it. Sure, it's going to work, it's going to take as long as it takes, and it's going to be a bit wonky at the beginning, but if we're all bought into it ideologically, then that's when you can start seeing things kind of like moving forward a little bit. Because I think it's heartbreaking.
The first step?
I think have a chat with your artist. I would say just chat with the artist. So there's a level of understanding, and for sure, money is a big factor for everybody. It just breaks my heart to see so many freelancers out of jobs right now, and venues going like, "I'm sorry, we're just trying to pay people that we have been employing. Like, what can we do?" So I think I don't know how you break that cycle, but I think the communication can be better to get people on the same page. But yeah, cooperatives and collaborations all the way. And Kirsten, you just won the chat by saying,
chat.
Yeah, you won the chat. So I don't know if you want to say.
Let me just, Andy's had his hand up for quite a while, and Alexander as well. So let me come to Alexander first, or Alex.
Either of them is fine, don't worry. Just to say, just to add something to what Margot was saying, like, yes, I think it's really important to have an honest chat with your artists, but at the same time, don't impose on them a certain expectation. Try to encourage them to follow their own pursuits. So don't just come with an expectation, oh, just impose the whole kind of financial pressure and all that, and the expectation in terms how the work should be, how the work should look, and so on. I think it's important, if you are in such a position, when you give an opportunity to an artist, it's important to encourage them to pursue their own interest, even if it's a bit different, even if it looks a bit different, because that will eventually pay off, I think. That's what I want to say, basically.
Okay, so have faith in the artist, but also encourage them to be different, to be themselves, and be different, not conform to this kind of set paradigm, let's say. Andy, is your point gone? Is it still there, Andy?
It's still there, yeah. I was thinking about the idea of sort of cooperatively run or cooperatively maintained spaces and the role that they play in kind of that long-term kind of engagement and being able to get through sort of difficult situations at the moment. So just to share a couple of things from Bradford. South Square Centre that I mentioned earlier on is kind of was initially set up by a group of artists who decided there wasn't enough space in the city for them to be doing their things, but because buildings are so cheap around here, they're able just to buy an entire sort of series of cottages and turn it into what's been a community and art centre. But my partner's been involved in then fundraising to take that as a 99-year lease. A peppercorn rent, so essentially they're guaranteed a space for that long, so it really kind of makes them accountable to that kind of community for that long-term thing. And on the other side, you've got a place like the sort of 1 in 12 club in Bradford, which is like one of the UK's, Europe's longest running anarchist social clubs, like autonomous social centres. Similar sort of scenario where actually a group of unemployed people came together in the kind of like early 80s and were putting on stuff for each other, their own community, and managed to obtain a building that's still running today. So I don't know. I was just wondering, obviously that's a very good situation in the north to it is in London, because that kind of ability to just get hold of space and keep it for that long. But this idea of sort of resilience, or the kind of resilience that's allowed for organisations that are operating in those places where space isn't at such a premium, and how the kind of change in the high street that the pandemic's going to have caused means that is that going to be an opportunity to say, well, we really need to rethink what kind of those places that used to be, have commercial rates based on them having this massive income, is like now they've got to have social impact.
Okay. So there is a sustainable model out there. There's a possibility in the future. Let me come to Joseph, because you've got your hand up. We've not heard from you yet. What's your point, Joseph?
Thank you very much for having me speak. My name is Wabire Joseph Ian. I'm based in East Africa, Uganda. Happy to be following Rich Mix and some of their programming and all that stuff. For me, as I was listening to this conversation, I was thinking basically the projects that we've been doing in collaboration with institutions in London, UK, and the fact that because of the pandemic and the crisis that is in our midst, all these programs have been affected. And so I was thinking, how do we program in collaboration with institutions outside our boundaries, And that is something I've been thinking about. Two, I also think, although a lot of things have been disrupted in the way we program art and culture projects, I also think there's an opportunity for us to reach out to more people, to be involved in the conversations, diversifying our reach and also getting more people involved in the conversations. Initially, I would not be able to actually access some of the content in such conversations because this is the first time I'm part of it, and I'm aware that this has been actually happening, So now I'm actually able to be part of the conversation, which is actually good. So I think we will get back to the physicalness of the art, although we'll be a little bit weary the fact that there is a pandemic and the crisis, but I think we'll get back to normal. The normal won't be the normal, but it will still be the normal that we used to, because art and culture can only be consumed more better when people come together intimately, So we're just going to find new innovative ways of how that will work out, and I think that's that's
so
something.
You're trusting the artists to come up with the innovations to solve these problems in the end.
Sorry?
You think that the artists can innovate to actually solve some of these problems in the end?
Yes,
innovations will happen.
Yes, because then we're going to see a lot of collaborations between visual artists and digital artists, you know. And the question is accessibility. How do people, how do I monetize my content and work on the digital platform? Those are some of the questions that are coming up. We can't say this is also breaking the barrier of how we consume art, but it's also giving us an opportunity to access even more people that are able to consume our work, you know, on a global scale. So I think there are opportunities, there are challenges, but artists are innovating. That is what I know. We are innovating as much as we can.
Yeah. So we're definitely trying. How that's going to, I mean, it's really interesting to get the view as well from Uganda and what that perspective is. And are you actually getting a wider audience now? Or are people being more interested in what's happening, or more able to see that? And is the audience changing? Also the question about how to actually monetize this, and will we find ways, or is it just about being as creative about the money as we are about the content?
Yes, so
yeah.
Back in Uganda, of course, the challenges are there. We also feel them, but we also think that the audiences have expanded in our programs that we have, because then initially very many people would not be able to come to Uganda to attend sort of like a festival or attend an event of that sort, a poetry night. But now these things are going online. So it's allowing more people to engage with our cultural programs online, digitally. Although, of course, when it comes to monetizing, we've all been affected because we are thinking, how do we make sure that through the programs and our content we're creating, we actually get some little bit of cash out of it, you know? It's a challenge. It's a challenge, a very big challenge, because very many artists have actually been creating. You find the comedy people doing something, you find the poets doing something, but then the question is, how are they monetizing? How are they surviving, even when they're creating all this content? That's the challenge.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. So you're getting bigger audience, but not that the cash flow hasn't come yet.
Yes.
Yes. Are other people feeling the same thing? Kane, you've got a point?
It was just to speak specifically. I mean, the really interesting, I think there's a lot that can be learned from countries like Uganda, where there is, I mean, there's less funding overall. I mean, yeah, very little funding in terms of government subsidy or support for the arts. And it is interesting how the creative industries has developed in a way that is far more entrepreneurially rooted than in the UK, and how from my experience with Kampala, you know, how artists will have various hats and various different things that they do to make money alongside making their work. So I think, you know, I think there is a lot that can be learned from other countries, particularly though where there has historically been less funding and support available.
Yeah, I mean, are we open to learning from Uganda and their entrepreneurship and how they're doing things? Is it something, I have to admit, I don't know that much about how things are structured there. So maybe we can hear a bit more about that. But Selma, you've got a point?
Yeah, I was just going to say, to ask if anyone had seen what Hey on Why Festival did, which I thought was really interesting, because they got audiences of over 100,000 on some of their talks. And so that I guess, having been an audience member at Hey on Why myself, I guess their representation was in audiences was much higher than usual, because there's only a certain amount of people you can fit into that small town. And it was, it wasn't very diverse, but lots of people engaging online. And then what they did is they put all of their past videos on a £10 a year subscription, I think it is. And obviously I don't know the financials behind it, but I just thought it was a great way of kind of reaching more audiences and finding ways to monetize it, which obviously if you've got an audience of 100,000, then that's maybe a bit easier. But and then speaking to a friend who actually lives in Hay, she said that it was a ghost town. So that's the other kind of downside, is that actually all the independent businesses and that usually thrive during the festival were kind of just closing down. So yeah, look, I don't know, it was an interesting one.
So there are ways to monetize things there, but is it about having then a really big name like the Hay Festival? What are people saying? Is there any chat on Facebook, Will? Is there anything going on?
It's a little bit quiet on Facebook at the moment. There are a couple of people watching, so if you are listening, it'd be great to hear your opinion. Just drop a comment and we'll get it shared.
Okay, so nothing from Facebook, anything from the Zoom chat or from Twitter or from... We're on multiple platforms here. I don't know the answer to this as well. Like, how do we, at the moment, we're just kind of scooting. We're not really worked out how to monetize this either. So any suggestions would be really gratefully received. I don't know. To me, what we do, if we charge people a subscription, I feel that it would kind of limit that, that reach. And it forms that barrier that is exactly what we don't really want to have when we're trying to get a conversation happening. So difficult questions. Where do we go from here, I guess is my question to you, to everyone out there, especially those who haven't said anything yet. Now's the time. Oh, I just saw a hand.
Was that hand?
It was a hand from Andy. You've really given us a lot from Bradford, Andy, it's been really valuable. I just want to say to other people, yes, bring in your thoughts as well. Andy, what's your comment?
Yeah, sorry, I'm aware I've been speaking too much.
Other people have not been speaking enough. That's the issue.
I was also thinking about that, just that Patreon model for artists, actually, and kind of like whether, kind of like setting something up where it's like, oh, I do this work. And I mean, I've seen a bit of an increase in that in terms of, people that do illustration and other work that's kind of, certainly with musicians, I think that's the bit that's really fallen out for me is, if you're not gigging, then what can you do there? But this idea of kind of like just an ongoing subscription to have like a crowd-funded patrons, whether people have been exploring that or how they feel about it.
Yeah. Okay. What do other people think about this? There's something from Margot. Go on.
So Lara had gone, but she's made some great contributions there. But in fact, if you do need to go, just don't disappear. Just let us know. We'll come to you for your final thoughts. But yeah, I'd encourage people to speak and share their points. I mean, something that Kirsten mentioned earlier, I got really excited about that, and the chat indeed as well, is about thinking about art as an investment, not just a government bailing and the sector out, but also from what Joseph was saying, and Kane chiming in about artists in Uganda having to wear multiple hats. I wonder whether simply the times where you can have career in the arts are over because it's just not sustainable, and maybe arts means something different now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So that's quite a big one.
Oh, Kirsten, I think you are leaving. Are
you?
So
give us a final thought, Kirsten, before you go. You've really contributed a lot to this, so thanks very much. What's your final thought?
No, thank you. Sorry, I've got a small one shouting at me. I think just to reiterate what I said in the chat, it's not about the money. It's about the people and it's about the creativity first and foremost. But I think, unfortunately, we need to remember that we do have the government that we have, I'm afraid. And I think in a way to get our message across, there is something about monetizing our value. And it was something I was actually looking at even before the pandemic in terms of social prescribing and how we were looking at how we could get involved with social prescribing. But actually, what does that mean? Not in real terms, because I think we know what it could mean in real terms, but what does it mean in financial terms? What is the impact that something like social prescribing could have to save money for the government, for the NHS, for other agencies? And unfortunately, I don't like this, but I think that maybe as a sector, we do need to wave our flag for the finances and the economics, because I think that's the way that we're going to get through to the powers that be. and that's the angle. And these kind of somewhat softer outputs. I mean, I completely agree with the Arts Councils, let's create the next 10 years and all of that, but I think we have to talk about it in a certain way that is going to have proper influence. So that's my final gambit.
Yeah. Are we really, really articulating the value that we're providing here in the arts sector? For example, social prescribing, when pharmaceutical prescribing gets such a big budget, should social prescribing get that same kind of budget? I just want to come to Wabwiri again. Is that right? Is that how you say your name?
Yes.
What's your point?
All right. I just wanted to talk about what Ken talked about, especially based on his experience being in Kampala and interacting with some of the artists. Really, in Uganda and East Africa in particular, we don't really look at art as business. We really look at it as something that is part of our social DNA. It's the way we socialize, So in most cases, we don't really look at it as the thing that is actually going to bring, because we do it almost every day, every time. Music is part of how we congregate. Music is part of how we bring each other together, Poetry, dance, all these things are embedded in our social DNA. So we do them almost every day, every time.
So in a way, you can't not do it. It's almost like it happens no matter what. And it's just part of the fabric of life.
Absolutely. And I think other communities need to take that as well. We don't have to, culture should be something that is socially, that should socially connect us without having to put a price tag to it at any time. It's only the capitalists that actually want us to monetize a lot of things and then have, so let's think more like that. And how do we do that here in Uganda? Most of the culture, most of the artists are actually doing totally different things, So when it comes to expressing themselves, it's just something they're passionate about, and it's just something they could do even when they're not getting something out of it in terms of.
I mean, listening to this conversation, do you find it a little bit capitalist that we're all talking about trying to make money from it? Should it just be more about doing the art and making it happen?
I think we interacting with a lot of arts in the UK, I think it's so money all the time. It's so money. Like you cannot talk about art without putting money into it. And I think it takes down the aspect of what art is supposed to be and culture is supposed to be. It's an expression. I think it's supposed to be an expression. Yes, there are people who actually are thinking that this is the only way I can make some little bit of money out of it. But on a broader scale, I think we need to think about it more like an expression, because then you have challenges where the government does not come in place. You're lucky that at least in the UK, you probably have governments that are very supportive. You have the Arts Council. But imagine a country like Uganda that does not have the Arts Council, It doesn't have anybody that actually supports, but they have to find ways of how to be able to survive and keep the culture going, So I think, like what Ken said, we need to borrow from other continents, from other societies and cultural groups, so that we can borrow some ways of how they interact with art and culture in general. And that way, it can probably give us some sort of balance in how we look at art in a broader sense, Yes.
Great stuff. We're kind of coming to the last 15 minutes, so it's probably time, I think, in a minute to get those final thoughts. And we've had one from Kirsten already. But does that reshaping of the arts environment post-COVID, does it actually mean a different view about money? Is it more now about expression? Do we have to sort of forget about making money, or are we going to get money from a universal basic income, which is going to leave us to be more expressive and be able to be more artistic without worrying about connecting it with having a livelihood? This is some of the points that are coming out at the moment. I think we'll try and have a look at some of the images that Rick's been doing in a minute as well, and see how that's framed the conversation. Margot, you've got a point.
I just want to bring in Tracy on this, because you've been commenting on chat. Sorry, Tracy, I kind of had to do it because your angle is very much from, you commented on creativity and well-being and that kind of impact there. But I just wanted to say what, just kind of echoing a little bit of Joseph was saying, I think the art just got mixed in with business big time. Maybe there was no other way out of it, I don't know. But just to hear a different perspective, again, perspective that we wouldn't have heard if it wasn't for the circumstances we find ourselves in now. The art is the fundamental, the very core of things. The art is in our DNA, or at least should be. I think it is, because we're human. And just kind of having that, as a reminder, I think it's deeply profound. And I think hopefully that will change the way we think about the arts. And, is it a funding burden, or what is it? Or do we need to be more subscription based for this? But anyway, Tracy, are you comfortable just chipping in?
Do you want to say what you? Yeah. Go on, Tracy. What were you going to say?
Yeah, thank you, Margot, for putting me in there. No, I was hoping to be more a listener today. That's great. I mean, I think that, like, it's been so demoralized, and the priority of it within education, that I think, unless a nation can value the creative education that it gives its young people, I feel that there's the burden is much more on us as other charities and other artists and within the community to carry that. And I've never been a great one for thinking that we have to rely upon our creativity and just to think that that's our profession. But like, we've got to earn a living. I think it's complex. I think it's not easy enough for me to say, we need to raise it as high up on the agenda as careers in the arts when we're trying to fundraise. But I don't think there's any easy answer.
I mean, the question about the creativity, I think for me, it's always, I think we can be creative as well about how we survive and how we get money and how we fund amazing projects. Because I think as well, it's not just about paying yourself, but actually having the resources to do really amazing stuff as well.
Yeah. Yes, it's about unpicking and defining what creativity is anyway, because, we don't need to even discuss that, because I think we know it comes in all sorts of forms. And it's just that basically how it impacts on our relationships with others and enriches our communities and the cultural sort of heritage of the countries we live in, or the global perspective.
I mean, that's another thing I think we're getting from this, is this global, local perspective, that we can have people from all around the world, but also focus it on a small, tiny part of London at the same time. And I think that, in a way, that is amazing. I think from my side, it is about the creativity and how to also make money. I don't think it should necessarily be a bad thing to be able to make money from your creative work, but I think you've also got to be creative about how you do that, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's get some final thoughts, because we're into the last 10 minutes. We still need to have a look at the visuals that Rick's been working on, and find out where we're going to go next as well. We talked about so much today, and it's gone in a really interesting direction, not totally unexpected.
And I would just say that if you know of anyone who would benefit from listening to some of these chats that we've been having today, or if you want to share it on your social media, please do. We are on Twitter at The People Tweet, or at Rich Mix London, and we're also on Facebook as The People Speak and Rich Mix London as well. So do find us, do share this, and bring other people to the conversation next time. Hopefully there'll be next one, I don't know. But yeah, it's 11 minutes before we have to wrap up, so we're gonna go for some final thoughts. Yes,
let's get some final thoughts. And it's really, I think it is also about putting our feelers out there and trying to reach out to other people that have got an interesting perspective on this as well, because I think we learn so much when we get these different perspectives. Anyone want to offer a final thought? Be the first up on the final thought.
Don't be shy.
I'm going to go to, maybe I'll go to Andy, seeing as he seems to be the have you got a final thought, Andy?
Definitely that sort of, that I think that really interesting to hear, the different things that are sort of on people's minds, but also, I really like this kind of idea that we could use the situation at the moment to push for like a better sort of way of quantifying the value of the arts in terms of its like social impact. Like that seems like a way to sort of lobby for being able to find other ways to kind of sustain what we're doing, but also the kind of bit about really like local, super local examples then being able to be connected up on a global scale, I think is a great, again, another really exciting opportunity. So they're the two things that I'll be looking to keep on going with.
I mean, that's the thing, is like in the past, for it to have a global reach, it had to be a really mega huge project with its, you know, like the opening of the London Olympics or something like that. But now more small scale, more community things can have this global reach as well, which I think is really, really nice. Let me go to Alex. You've put your hand up. Have you got a final thought for us, Alex?
Yeah, I think it's really important to use this time to reflect a lot more, because before the pandemic, everything was pretty much on autopilot mode, like kind of producing like this kind of never ending. And now I think we finally had a bit of time to reflect, and then after a serious reflection, whether it's about, you know, the funding models, whether it's about representation and who's in the room and who's not, I think it's time then for like clear actions. So I think these are the two most important things, like reflecting and then actions.
Can I just ask you, from your perspective, Alex, what actions are you going to be taking?
Well, I spoke a bit earlier about the representation of migrants, and we are actually in the process of starting a nationwide movement called Migrants in Theatre. So basically sort of lobbying for more migrants in theatre, on stages and in the creative teams. So at the moment, we're basically trying to reach out to as many people as possible who are in the same situation. And then once we have the strength of the numbers, we're going to try to engage with the venues and potential allies to change this. So yeah, that's
okay. Well, that's great. And if you could put that in the chat, both in the link to that project, if it's up online yet, that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure.
For us to hear about that. That sounds like a great initiative. Any other final thoughts? Is it time to quickly go and have a quick look through the visuals? Rick, are you ready for that? Can we have a quick look, a quick summary of where we've been so far? Are you ready? Okay, so we started off talking about Zoom fatigue and the fatigue of going digital. And I guess that kind of like merged into this idea of who's online and who's not. Then this one is, this is about connecting with the older demographic and how to sort of change it to, you know, how to translate it or how to bring other people in. This is about the dance performance in the basketball court, which actually sort of brought in this whole question of like, how do we actually socially engage when we get these guys in the basketball court there? Let's just move through this very quickly. This is about underrepresented communities. We've got Czech here, which is, I believe, Polish for, hey, how's it going? Or something like that. But we're still sticking with this, I'm gonna go this way, with this kind of typecast role of the Polish woman as a cleaner. Can we actually expand from that? I'm sure Rick was doing that ironically. Let's move through.
You better be.
This is about thinking about money in a different kind of way and thinking about, you know, where does that creativity go? Is it just about in the box of the theatre? And I think today we've really gone outside of the box of the theatre or the gallery, and just that creative juice has just flowed all over the street, so to speak. And then there's one more. Is this like an artist making money? Is this like an old artist making money? Or it looks like they're actually giving the money out. So I'm going to read that in that way as well, that the old artist is actually then funding the younger artists to or any age, I suppose, to actually do their thing. So hopefully that is kind of giving you guys some juices to kind of react to any of that as a final thought. Where are you going to go with this? What's your final thought on this? What's been the most interesting thing that someone said, thought-provoking? Do you feel inspired or do you feel demotivated from this conversation? People, hit me with some final thoughts.
Where's the cricket sound when we need it?
Okay, look, let's. Will, have you got a final thought? Or is this coming from Facebook?
In Facebook, Simon just chucked in for the final thought here. He said he felt the last question was forcing us to nail why art and creativity is good for us. But is it this insidious spread of market speak, or does art actually have to get better at fighting its corner for using the language of business? So do we need artists and mental health facilitators now?
Yeah.
Lots of big questions to end on there, but
big, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, is it a marketing question, or is it about using a completely different language and actually talking about our value in our own way? So that's a really interesting. Kane, final thought?
Yeah, it was really good to hear about Andy just talking about cooperatives and the whole conversation around that. And I guess, are there opportunities for partnerships and for organisations to work together who maybe haven't thought of doing so before? And can we then maybe at a local scale address more issues and engage more people through that?
All right, can you give us an example of what might be a novel organisation that an arts organisation wouldn't normally work with? That's putting you on the spot,
I mean, well, I guess it's coming back to things like, I mean, there's an interesting thing about I think around restaurants and cafes and those that pivoted to being, to doing food delivery stuff for vulnerable residents. I guess those organisations, particularly at the moment, who have been able to reach the most isolated communities through just simply serving a need.
Yeah. Could we be partnering up, for example, with Deliveroo? I know that
yeah, we've mentioned this before.
Yeah, we've been through that. There's no time today to go back to that.
Thank God.
Judith, final thought? Are you just muted there? Yep, there we go.
Yeah. No, just wanted to say thank you for a really inspiring 2 hours. I think for me, those ideas about new conversations, the question was posed at the beginning, are we talking to the right people? Are the right people in the room? Certainly there are people that we've never spoken to before, and this is providing those conversations, ideas. I think for us, it's very much about co-creation going forward. It feels like we have been forced into a situation where we're now having to rethink who we are. Let's use that as an opportunity rather than the threat that it feels at the moment.
Yeah.
So thank you. And for me, it's reaching out to that East End community. What can we offer? Please come back to us.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess the East End has always been a diverse place, and so it's got connections with everywhere. So it kind of makes sense for me anyway, that we can be East Enders, and we can also be out in the wider world. Ellen, was there anything from Instagram? Have you got a final thought yourself? Yeah, go on, yeah.
Very insightful discussion. Nothing on Instagram as yet, but I'm sure the conversation will continue.
It does tend to just kind of like have a longer tail on Instagram and flow longer. Have you got a final thought, Ellen?
There was many things. Really great to hear about other arts organisations around the UK. I know Andy mentioned the organisation he's a part of, so I'm quite interested to hear more about what they're planning to do. Yeah, there was so many good points, So
yeah, I mean, that's a good point as well. Like, if you have mentioned an arts organisation or a project, do throw it into the chat, either in this chat or in the Facebook chat, because it really does help us to get more of a sense of what. I certainly look at all that stuff, and other people do as well. So it is important. Any other final thoughts from anyone else? Even if you haven't said anything so far, there's been a few people sitting on this that have been watching but not said anything. Maybe I should also, Selma, anything from the Twitter? Has there been anything interesting from that?
Just lots of likes and retweets, especially on needing more than just bailing out in terms of funding, and also points on representation. Lots of people thinking that this could be an opportunity actually to tackle representation in arts organisations.
Okay, so look at this as an opportunity. Now's the time to do it. I think we've got a car alarm going off, which is sort of like weirdly signalling the end of the Talkaoke session for here.
Luckily, it's not our car, but unlucky for some, I think. Oh no, All in control.
Oh, it's
Fine.
okay. It's all sorted.
I would just like to say that this has been really great, and we do Talkaokes here and there and everywhere. Our next session will actually be touching on fundraising. So we're going to be partnering up with Institute of Fundraising on 17th of June. Link coming up soon. And also on 25th of June, we're doing our monthly Talkaoke with and for and from our Aberfeldy Street in Poplar in Tower Hamlets neighborhood, where we mix in offline and online approaches, bringing people in from the street. So if you want to be part of that in a socially distanced / online manner, please, there's a link in the chat. And those sessions are very experimental, so always have a drink to hand.
Have a drink handy.
That'll be my recommendation, but you can do whatever you want. But yeah, and if you want to hear more about the people speaking, what we do, I can add you to our irregular mailing list, which is very irregular, believe me. But yeah, we're on social media, and if you want to share your contact details with people, please do it on the chat, and keep your eyes peeled, because there may be some more things coming up with Rich Mix. And yeah, thank you so much to Rich Mix for having us. Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Selma, Rosa, Joanne. And thank you to and Tracy, of course, and thank you to Ellen and Will and Rick on visuals, and thank you to Mikey for everything, for all this chat. And yeah, this is us. Drop us a line in chat if you want to share your details or if you want to say anything. But you've been absolutely wonderful.
So thanks everyone. I think it's just time for the wave, for the comedy wave that goes on forever, and the theme music that we don't have. And thanks everyone. Thanks to everyone that participated. Let's keep this conversation going. We will see you soon. It's been a great session, really inspiring. It's going to take me hours to unpick what's actually everyone said, but thanks everyone for taking part. It's been great. Thanks very much.